We are live. Welcome back. We are here after lunch in general and housing and continuing our series of introductions in a classic general and housing manner, which is a whole different subject from the last thing we just had. This afternoon, we're going to hear from what, as I described earlier, is commonly known. Yeah, it's kind of the nickname of the V's. The Vermont School Boards, the Vermont Principals, and the Vermont Superintendents Association. As I've mentioned before, we've had our interplay with this group of folks is largely along the lines of labor statute, public sector labor law, as it pertains to teachers and schools. And so we've had well, it's so good to see 2/3 of you in 3D. It's been a while. And we just wanted to have a general all-around introduction. 9 out of my 12 folks are new to the committee. They bring whatever experience they may have. And some of them have school board or teaching experience along the way. But we really just wanted to have you in to introduce yourselves, let us know what your roles are, and time permitting, you know, if you want to start letting us know what your priorities are for the year. I will say for education, every year is hard, period. And I want to recognize, I know you're heads of the associations, but I just want to recognize from me personally and from the committee at large, just to recognize the amount of work that you put in for the benefit of Vermonters, and that the last 3 years in particular, and probably the next 3 years moving out, it's been really difficult to manage, and we appreciate truly and deeply the work that you put into it, and the work that the hours that you've spent both in this building, but also in the communities with the other school boards to try to provide at the levels that you're at, the best education that we can afford for our students. It doesn't go unseen, at least in this building, about the sacrifices that you've made on behalf of our educational system. So I just want to say that before because I mean it, and it's something that's important for me to make sure that anyone who does this kind of public service is recognized in a way that is really, you don't get it very often, do you? We don't get it very often. So I just want to make sure that we recognize and appreciate the work that you do. We may be on opposite sides of I don't view us as ever on opposite sides per se, but we have to facilitate conversations that have opposite sides. And I just want to recognize that we do it in good faith, and so do you. And we know that. And no matter how it goes, we're all fighting for the same end. So thank you for your work. With that, Sue, you're first on our list. And we'll go around the table again because we're all new to this committee. I'm Representative Tom Stevens from Waterbury.
Kathleen James, representing Arlington, Manchester, Sandgate, and Park Sunderland.
Claudia Lamont, representing Lamoille, Washington District.
I'm Joe Parsons, I represent Newbury, Thompson, and Croft.
Emily Krasnow, I represent South Burlington.
Ashley Barton, Fairfax and Georgia.
Caleb Elder, Addison 4.
Dennis Labowny, Caledonia 3.
Elizabeth Burrows, Windsor 1, which is Heartland, West Windsor, and Windsor. And for full disclosure, I'm also a VSBA member.
I'm Larry Labor, representing Arlington, Essex District 1.
I'm Mary Howard, and I represent Rutland District 6.
And Robin Chestnut Tangerman, and I represent your district.
Yes, you do.
All right, so if you get angry at us, all right, welcome.
Thank you very much, Chair Stevens, for your kind words welcoming us, and I'm really happy to be here for an introduction to VSBA, to your committee. VSBA is the Vermont School Boards Association, and I'm Sue Siglowski. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont School Boards Association. If you don't mind, I thought I would talk just briefly about the role of school boards in Vermont, so it would set the context for what VSBA is. So as most of you probably know, school boards are not involved in the day-to-day operations of schools. They are responsible for high-level student-focused oversight to assure delivery of effective education program in their communities at a cost that is reasonable for the taxpayers and that complies with federal and state law, of which there are many applying to education. School boards have 6 areas of responsibility at the local level. And those are, first, it's really important for them to engage the community to establish a vision for the school district. And that really drives the rest of their work. Second, they adopt policies that govern the school district in accordance with that vision. They hire the superintendent and they establish expectations for the superintendent and evaluate the superintendent. Fourth, they develop a budget and provide financial oversight, which is a very important role that they play. Fifth, they monitor progress toward that vision that I spoke about as the first responsibility. And then sixth, they need to operate in an ethical and effective manner. And one of the examples of that is avoiding conflicts of interest. So to serve on a school board, we think, is really upholding the great American tradition of a free public education for all. And it forms the foundation of our democracy, a well-informed citizenry. It's extremely important that students develop critical and independent thinking skills and that they understand how history can impact the future. And so simply put, education is crucial for the future of our state, and school boards play an important role in that system. So now that I've spoken a little bit about the role of school boards, I'll tell you about the Vermont School Boards Association. The Vermont School Boards Association is a 501c3, so we're a nonprofit and we are a member association. We do not have any regulatory oversight over school boards. The vision and the mission of the organization have evolved over time, and just this past year, our board went through a pretty comprehensive strategic planning process. So we have a new vision and a mission, and as part of that process, they developed some core beliefs, and there are 8 of them. It's in my written testimony. I'm not gonna go over all of them, but one of them really stands out to me, which is public education in Vermont is critically important for a healthy democracy, is the engine that drives economic development, and is the core of a strong community. So we have a new vision and mission. They're short and they're in my written testimony. I'll just read you the one sentence that's the vision. The VSBA is the trusted leadership organization advancing the essential work of Vermont school boards so that each and every student is supported in their educational journey. And those words, each and every student, are very important to us from the equity standpoint. As I mentioned, we're a membership organization. We understand that not all school board members see every single issue in the same way. VSBA has very clear processes for developing our positions on legislative issues. But it's possible you might hear from individual school board members who feel differently about certain topics. And we welcome all school board members to share their views, not only with us, but also with you. The VSBA has a 24-member board of directors. There's a president, an immediate past president, and then 2 representatives from each of our 11 regions in the state. So the entire state is covered by our board of directors. The current president is Neil Odell from Norwich, and so you may see him come in and testify to your committee at some point in the biennium. VSBA is governed by bylaws, resolutions, and policies. And resolutions are really what I use as the executive director when I'm coming in to testify to a committee. I'm not coming in and telling you my own personal views. I need to look at the resolutions that have been adopted by our members. And the process that we go through for that is that any member board can propose in the spring. We have a deadline. They can propose a resolution that goes through our board's resolution committee and the full VSBA board. And then it goes to our annual meeting where the members vote on it, and it requires 60% of the members to vote in favor of a resolution for it to pass. So usually when I'm coming in to testify, there will be a resolution that I can rely on, but if there isn't, we do have a legislative committee, and also the board of directors has the authority to give me direction as to how I should testify on a particular topic. We are a small organization. There's only 4 of us on the staff, including me. So we have a lot going on year round. Even during the legislative session, we're doing a lot of work to support school boards throughout the state. We provide training opportunities for school boards so that they can understand their roles and their responsibilities. We have monthly webinars that are free for our members on important topics. We do workshops for new school board members. We do training that is joint training that's required by law for superintendents and board chairs to go through together on an annual basis. And then we do board retreats and customized board development. If a board is having a particular issue, we really work with them to tailor the training to what they're experiencing and helping them. We have a lot of resources on our website. We also hold an annual conference, and we have regional meetings each fall. And usually at those regional meetings, we'll be sharing information with our members that is important for them to know. And a lot of times it's based on the work that you've done in the previous legislative session that we're educating them about. Let's see, we're updating our curriculum this year to support a school board's success in meeting and exceeding the upcoming district governance standards. So for those of you who are not new to the legislature, you'll remember that Act 127 of 2022, which was the bill that implemented, updated, and new weights for the education funding. There was a requirement in that bill that the Agency of Education, through rulemaking, develop district quality standards. And they had to cover certain topics, and one of those topics was governance. So Secretary French asked the Vermont School Boards Association if we would take the first attempt at drafting those governance standards. And we used a very comprehensive process to do that. We had one representative from each of our 11 regions. So there were 11 representatives on a task force that worked with Phil Gore, who is our Director of Board Services, and who has a lot of experience with governance standards in other states. And they met, they did a lot of hearing from experts on this topic, and hearing from the Secretary of Education, hearing from superintendents, and through about 3 or 4 months of work, they developed a draft, which was also discussed at our regional meetings and at our conference, and we presented to Secretary French in November. So he's in the process of starting that rulemaking process and has accepted our recommendations without any changes. And those draft standards are linked in my testimony if anyone's interested in looking at them. We also provide consulting services for school boards. For instance, last night I was meeting with the board, helping them with their superintendent evaluation. We do superintendent searches and basically whatever the need, strategic planning. There's a lot of different consulting services that we provide. We have model policies for school districts, and this is something that is probably the part of our website that gets the most hits is our model policy manual. It's used extensively. We communicate with our members every week. Right now, we send out a weekly email every Tuesday. We also do legislative reports. We're getting ready to issue our first legislative report of this session. And we have a book called The Essential Work of Vermont School Boards that's published every year. And that's sent free of charge to every new school board member in the state. I mentioned that educational equity is very important to the VSBA. And we've done a significant amount of internal work the staff has on that topic for the last couple of years. And we've also been fortunate to receive a grant from the Vermont Community Foundation, a Welcoming Communities grant, and been able to, through that grant, to work with a consultant to review some of our model policies through an equity lens. And we've made some changes based on that to the model policies based on that work. We also worked with another consultant, and I should mention that that the grant that we received was in conjunction with the Superintendent's Association and the Principals Association. So we've worked with another consultant helping board chairs and superintendents that are facing challenging situations related to equity, giving them resources to be able to get through sticky situations that they're encountering. Lastly, on the topic of equity, we recently received a grant from the McClure Foundation that we're very excited about, and that will be used to start an affinity group for BIPOC school board members. And lastly, under all the things that we provide for our members is advocacy. So we're always interested in improving public education for each and every student, and so that's one of the things one of the ways that we do that is by advocating in the General Assembly and also in the public policy development with the Agency of Education and the State Board. Would you like me to cover priorities for this session now, or would you like me to give more time to Jeff and Jay and come back if you have time?
Yeah, let's do that. Let's have more introductions and then we'll talk about priorities. Yes, Representative Burrows.
Just a quick question. Thank you. Do you work with Ideal Vermont?
We haven't worked directly with Ideal Vermont, but I know what Ideal Vermont is, and I think there's a lot of opportunity to work together. Yeah.
Ideal Vermont is the.
Oh, it's good. Bless you.
Bless you. Bless you.
It is it's a kind of project that is spearheaded by the Office of Racial Equity that it sort of coaches towns and municipalities that have done some equity work, but it's sort of for towns that want to start doing equity work so they don't have to reinvent the wheel over and over again. Mm-hmm. And so looping in school boards and the other municipality that people don't think of when they think of municipalities.
Yes.
Would help kind of galvanize that or just wondering if you had what organizations are part of that structure. Thank you.
We're not formally part of that structure, but we for instance, we had held a training in, I believe it was in November, beginning of November, with the Arizona School Boards Association. They have a Leading for Equity curriculum, and we had asked them to come here and provide that training to a group of stakeholders, and there was a representative from the Office of Racial Equity at that training. And we were really trying to look and see whether that was something that would be transferable to Vermont. It's not directly transferable, but we think we're working on making a Vermont version of it and getting their input on that.
Representative James?
I'm fine, thanks.
All right, any further questions right now for Sue? She'll be in the room when we come back around.
Thank you.
Great, thank you. All right, next up we have Jay Nichols, who is up on the screen. Jay, welcome back, or welcome maybe all the new folks here. So.
Thank you, Chair Stevens. Appreciate it. And I appreciate your comments at the beginning of this meeting. I'm a longtime Vermonter, as you know, but I was a little gutless this morning and I decided to work from home instead of driving the 81 miles to Montpelier today. So our roads are pretty bad over here. So again, thank you for having me today. For the record, my name is Jay Nichols. I'm the Executive Director of the Vermont Principals Association. And I just want to say on behalf of our members, we agree and we appreciate the members of the General Assembly for all your hard work on behalf of all Vermonters. So just a little bit about the VPA. I sent Ron some written testimony, but I have 2 things that I'll touch on. We're governed by an executive council, and that executive council consists of 12 active members. Like the school boards, we are a member-driven organization. So we have 12 active principals, an active assistant principal, a career center director, and a retired principal members for a total of 15-member board. And they meet regularly throughout the year and they provide macro leadership for the organization, similar to how a well-functioning school board would serve a school district. The VPA provides support to over 800 members who are mostly principals, assistant principals, and high school athletic directors. We do have a number of central office employees, including superintendents who are VPA members, as well as retired school leaders and aspiring school leaders. And our mission is pretty short and sweet. The Vermont Principals Association supports school leaders to improve the equity and quality of educational opportunities for all students. And the VPA does this by supporting and advocating for school building leaders and students. I actually feel very fortunate to be the executive director of an organization that has right in its mission statement that our purpose focuses on equity and educational opportunities for kids. So I'm pretty fortunate that I get to refer back to that in all the decisions that we make. And we make sure that we keep students centered in our decision making and anything that we do. So when we take a stance on an issue, it's because we believe that's what's best for students at that time. In our work on a daily basis, we support and advocate for educational issues that are important to school leaders. And we also provide professional learning for school leaders and other educators year round. We also provide membership oversight for high school sports and activities. We have, I apologize, phone's ringing again. We have 33 or 34 committees total. About 30 of those are dedicated to sports. You know, there's a basketball committee, there's a snowboarding committee, and then there's a big committee that oversees all the sports committees. So regular meetings are going on related to high school sports and high school activities all the time. We also have a weekly newsletter called VPA Leads that goes out to all VPA members. And we provide 3 hours of weekly drop-in meetings for principals across the state to network with each other on Zoom at the elementary, middle, and high school levels weekly. We also have an affinity group that we support, actually 2 of them, with time, space, and financial resources. One is for people of color that are school leaders in Vermont, and the other one is for LGBTQ questioning plus leaders in Vermont. And both of those organizations we've had together for the last 2 years, and we provide all the support for them. I did want to share that principal and assistant principal turnover in Vermont last year was 31%. To my knowledge, that's never been higher than 22% in any given year. That really is, you could consider that a crisis. Jeff can talk about superintendents, but the turnover of superintendents was at a similar level. And the job, as you probably know, has never been harder, never had higher expectations, never had more accountability without corresponding resources. And those were like my prepared remarks. And I did put down a few things that I wanted to share with you on the housing front. Would it be okay to do that now or not?
Well, you've been so short so far, so why not?
I know. Sue talks more than I do.
We are the housing committee, and I have to imagine that attracting teachers, principals, superintendents from any place else, you're having the same issue as what we're hearing. So yeah, please share that with us.
Okay. So, you know, we need housing and childcare support. Many parents can't work because they can't afford childcare, and many people can't afford to live in Vermont, especially because of the housing. So we've lost many teacher candidates simply because they could not find affordable housing near where they were offered a teaching job. Last year, one example, we lost a principal and a teacher. They were married. They came to Vermont, they had 3 kids, and both found jobs. They came here because of the jobs. They thought it would be, they had pretty good income. They thought they'd be able to find a place. They could not find a place that was anywhere near where they lived. They rented for the full year and just said, we can't make this work, and they left. So we lost, from my perspective, a good principal, and I think the teacher was good too, although I don't know that for sure. So the housing and childcare costs and issues are making it very hard. And I harp all the time about our key demographic being our 19 to 44-year-olds. And if you look at the census data, we're hurting in that area. We've got plenty of old people, Chair Stevens. There's plenty of us around. We need young people, 19 to 44, that have kids and are going to work for the next 30 years and pay taxes. And that's an area that we're really worried about. And that will bring in more students. So we are proposing, and we propose this in Senate Ed and House Ed, and my understanding is that Senate Ed is going to put forth some type of bill on this to do a Teach in Vermont campaign. And we're looking at things like the governor's $10,000 remote worker concept, changing that around to be an educator $10,000 concept, where if you move here from another state and you teach here for 5 years, let's give them a bonus of $10,000, a 5-year retention bonus that they can be used for a down payment on a house. We're talking about looking at teacher incentives to have lower rates, helping them with banking regulations and stuff to subsidize loans to help them get houses earlier. Because one of the things we know is that when people buy homes, they tend to stay. When people rent and things get tough, they tend to be more willing to move away. And we're also looking at some type of a state loan forgiveness program for Vermont institutions for people who pursue education and stay in Vermont for a given amount of time. So if I'm a kid at Middlebury College in the teacher program there, and I am from Arizona and I came here because I wanted to check out the skiing, if we can get that kid to stay here and say, listen, you teach in Vermont for 5 years, this is, we'll forgive this much of your state part of the loan. Those types of things are things that we're looking at. So I just wanted to share that, given your role in housing, and that we at the VPA are willing to work with you any way that we can to help support anything that can be done in the area of housing to make it more affordable for people to live here.
Great. Well, there's going to be a lot of more than chatter about it. I think it's, and I know that's also not unique to Vermont.
That's correct.
So it's a big issue, and in a free market world, the solutions are free market choices. There's just a lot. So yes, anything that your organizations can provide in terms of ideas and helping us think about this. I'm not even talking about thinking outside the box, just trying to think about it and try to get an idea of what the best tools are going to be. So we have a question from Representative Burrows and then Chestnut Tangerman.
Thank you. I was wondering, when you were talking about the 31% principal turnover last year, principal and vice principal turnover last year, was that based on departures or hiring?
So the way that works is the way turnover is done for superintendents and principals through nationally is you take the seat that they were in the previous year as the same person still in the same seat. So when we talk about turnover, that's what it means. So if I'm an assistant principal at Anytown Elementary School and I move to a principalship someplace else, that does count as turnover. And the rationale behind that is that in leadership positions, when turnover happens more than, if a person's not there at least 3 to 7 years, it's pretty hard to have substantial change that helps actually improve a school or any organization for that matter. So that's how it's calculated at the federal level. So
I just a couple of really tiny clarifying questions. So in my district, we added a principal. So how would that figure into the?
You mean you added a principal or you added a new position?
Both.
Okay, so when you add a new position, the following year that will be a position where if that same person is not in it, that will count as a lost position.
Okay, so that doesn't count in the turnover rate. Adding a position doesn't count in the turnover rate.
No.
So what about the second tiny little question? What if we have 3 principals at one school and they trade around who's the principal of what part of the school?
Yeah,
Does
no,
that
that won't matter if the same three people are in the same school, but let's say you took them and one of them went to a different school in your district.
Yep.
Then that would count.
Yeah, but if one is the principal of the high school and she goes to the elementary school, does that count?
We don't count that in Vermont. I don't know if they do nationally.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Thank you. And if you like, you can wait and, say, well, ask Mr. Francis this question, because it applies to both principals and superintendents. As well as the increased turnover, I see a lot of what I would call a revolving door, just moving to a new district, new school. And I'm wondering what the reason, to what do you attribute the huge turnover? I could understand people throwing up their hands and leaving the profession, but to just go to a different school where you have the same problems and you're starting over, the reasons for that are less obvious to me.
Yeah, it's a nuanced answer in that it all depends on the context and there's also a lot of variables. So it's not uncommon for someone to be a principal of a small elementary school or a rural elementary school and be there for 3, 4, 5 years and think, I'm doing pretty good. I think I'm ready for a bigger school. Or you know what? I think I'm ready now to be a high school principal. So there's some of that. There's also some of people just leaving the profession. Just saying that, I think you may have all seen that we had the Burlington principal leave the principalship to take a job at Rhino Foods, where she's going to make as much or more money with a lot less stress. So I think there's factors there too, we've lost 2 or 3 superintendents in the last couple of years to the private industry too, for jobs that pay a lot more and probably are, less stressful and less in the public eye. So I think that's part of it. I think sometimes for superintendents, if you are hired by a school board and you're on the same page with the school board and things are going well, new elections can change the dynamics of the school board, and maybe that's no longer a good fit for you. And the same thing can happen with the principal. If you don't have a solid relationship with your superintendent or your vision is different, then sometimes people will leave because of that. So I think there's a lot of variables that are in play there.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Representative Lamont.
Thank you. It's a question for actually all of everyone, all of the presenters today. I have a question around if you have numbers on the number of people who you have affinity spaces, and like everyone has mentioned, equity so far and affinity spaces for their staff. Do you know what the numbers look like for those groups?
I do for our groups.
Yeah.
We have one of the groups has I think 12 people in it, and the other one I think has 9 in it that are the regular attendees. And sometimes there's people that will come in and out of those groups. Now, full disclosure, we don't have anybody on the VPA staff that facilitates that. We keep it so it's anonymous for them. So we have Kevin Dirth, who's a retired superintendent. He runs the group he's a facilitator for the LGBTQ leader group, and that has superintendents, principals, and anybody that wants to be in it. And the People of Color Affinity group is run by Bonnie Johnson-Ayton, who is a current principal coach in the Burlington School District, who's been a VPA member for a long time. So we just provide them resources. We pay for the facilitation. We give them any tools and things that they need. But we purposely do not go to those meetings. We want anybody to go that feels like they want to go.
Thank you. And then do you feel that I know just anecdotally in many states, many towns around the state, there have been a lot of departure of educators and other people in leadership roles due to racism and more so explicitly in the school system. And so do you feel that having these groups helps retain or build to help retention with educators of color and things like that in your school systems? Or have you not noticed any of that turnover?
We get data we do surveys with the group, and the data is that they really appreciate having other people that are in similar circumstances to them to have the conversations with. But remember, we don't have an affinity group for teachers. Vermont NEA might, I don't know. Our group is for school leaders and school system leaders. So we know that they're appreciative of it, and they say it's helped them find connection in Vermont and sense of belonging, but I'm not sure how that is with teachers, to be honest.
Thank you.
All right, any further questions for Jay at this time? All right, thank you, Jay. Please hang out, and we'll have Jeff up next. Jeff Francis, thanks for coming.
Thank you very much for having me. I wanted to start by acknowledging your recognition of educators. Thank you very much. I'd like to, in kind, recognize the contributions of legislators. I've been in my job for more than 20 years, so I've seen a lot of policy water across the dam. And I resonate with your comment that not always are we in agreement, but ultimately we usually get good outcomes and good products through the discourse that you facilitate in your role as chair and that you participate in as legislators. In my case, again, my name is Jeff Francis. I'm the executive director for the Superintendent's Association. I feel that I've been blessed in my association with school superintendents in Vermont, public education, and also the ability to engage in such rich public policy. I think that education for people who are interested in public policy is so rich because we touch so many areas. For example, Jay Nichols wanted to use a little time to talk about housing, and housing is not something that historically we've thought about in terms of what's happening in education, but we're at that point now because we're suffering worker shortages and we live in a high cost state, and we're trying to figure out how we can have the most qualified people in front of the students who are really at the center of the educational process. So in terms of the association itself, it's an organization that has a mission which centers around our efforts to promote improvement to laws, regulations, and practices. So a lot of work that I do on a daily basis really focuses on what we have in this state in terms of statutes and a regulatory framework. As is in evidence by the testimony by the two prior witnesses, there's a huge amount of engagement in the community of public education. So I am and my colleagues are constantly in touch with one another in terms of their perspective, what it is they'd like to accomplish. That's in evidence in a number of different ways. Sometimes we're in agreement, sometimes we aren't. Right now, I think that you're aware that we're working in something called the Education Equity Alliance, which includes our three associations plus NEA, which is really centered on making sure that our public education delivery system has an emphasis on equity, transparency, and accountability. So it's a long-winded way, I guess, of saying that we really are constantly engaged in an extremely dynamic policy environment. In terms of my work in the associations itself, our mission also includes supporting superintendents in their roles through transparent, proactive analysis and communications. So even though I am a relatively well-known person in this building because of the history that I've enjoyed working as the executive director of the association, I have an authorizing environment that comprises of superintendents. So I'll come in and I'll provide testimony, and it sometimes will be attributed to me, but it's really testimony that's offered through the constant connection that I try to have with superintendents in their role as chief executive officer of school systems in Vermont, which are very, very complicated and dynamic organizations. So superintendents have responsibility at the local level to boards who are they're accountable to, along with the taxpayers. And they preside over pretty complicated systems involving hundreds of employees who get deployed to have a high quality public education system in Vermont. And as part of our mission, we also do a lot of professional development. So in my prior testimony in the Senate Education and House Education Committees, I was accompanied by Chelsea Myers, who's our Associate Executive Director. We have a 3-person staff. Chelsea's the Associate Executive Director. What's apparent to many of the people with whom we work is that my background is not as a teacher or in education, but hers is. So in recent years, the last 5 years, we've focused on bolstering professional learning for superintendents and school district staff through things like professional training for the entire central office team. We work in providing support around supervision of principals, the pedagogy associated with learning. So although superintendents are CEOs, as it were, we are trying to support them as lifelong learners themselves in terms of doing their jobs in the most effective way we can. Our organization is a 501c6 nonprofit. That goes back to the origins of the association, which dates to the early 1960s in terms of the formal organization. In the 40s, the Superintendent's Association got started as a branch of the Vermont NEA. But with the onset of collective bargaining, and that's something that's the purview of your committee, the decision was made to separate management and labor. And that will not come as a surprise to you all on this committee, particularly the veterans, in terms of some of the legislation that your committee confronts. But a 501c6 construct is more like a business league or a chamber of commerce. It's an association of professionals. So that's how we're organized, sort of professionals in support of one another. But the mission of the organization has extended to what we can do through that association for the benefit of public education and most especially the children that public education serves in Vermont. I report directly to a 10-member board of trustees that meets monthly. Those trustees are 4 officers, 5 regional representatives, and the past president of the association. The current president is Peter Burrows from Middlebury. Amy Miner is the president-elect. She's the superintendent in Colchester. Julie Regenball is our secretary. She works for the Missisquoi Valley School District, which is the Swanton region. Lynn Coda from Franklin Northeast Supervisory Union is the treasurer. And then we have 5 regional representatives, Michael Clark from the Grand Isle SU, Jennifer Botzojern from Kingdom East, that's the Northeast region, Sherry Souza, who's the superintendent down at Windsor Central, which is the Woodstock region, Brooke Olson Farrell from Slate Valley, which is Fairhaven and the community surrounding Fairhaven, and David Younts, who's the past president of the association. So that's the folks to whom I represent, to whom I report. Those regional groups that I mentioned comprise the various 5 regions of the state: Northeast, Champlain Valley, Central Vermont, which is the Winooski Valley, Southeast and Southwest. And those regional groups meet with tremendous frequency themselves. So they have regular monthly meetings, but through the pandemic and as a result of the pandemic, they're meeting much more frequently now because they realized that from an operational standpoint, they could benefit themselves and the school systems they serve if they met with a fair amount of regularity. I mentioned that Chelsea's the associate executive director. We also have an office manager. We're just a 3-member organization from a staffing standpoint. And I think the way I would sort of sum up what we're engaged in, we're an at your service organization. So not a day goes by that I don't hear from a superintendent with a particular issue, interest, or challenge that they're trying to confront. And the way that I respond to their requests for service are to either respond with knowledge that I've gained over the years myself because I've confronted a similar situation, or I'll refer them to somebody who I know has expertise in a particular area, or I'll help them as an advocate, I think, as it were, by connecting them to a state agency. So an example is PCBs. My association is heavily engaged in navigating the PCB sampling and response. So when a superintendent gets confronted with an issue like PCBs, they'll contact me, and I've developed relationships with the Department of Environmental Conservation, the Department of Health, and the Agency of Education, so I can help them navigate that issue. That's just an example. It might be somebody who wants to work on improving their curriculum, and I'll reach out and find resources for them with respect to that from among their colleagues. So that's a sense of how we work. In recent years, in addition to PCB sampling, we've been heavily engaged in supporting the implementation of Act 173, which is a law that the purpose of which is to provide better services to students who struggle. Chelsea Myers, the Associate Executive Director, has played a very significant role in connecting the education quality standards in Vermont to Act 1, which is intended to provide better service to students, all students, and make sure that we exist in a culturally sensitive environment in Vermont. We also, like the other two associations, have been trying to bolster our emphasis and performance, I would say, in areas of equity and inclusion. So a lot of the training that we're focused on right now points toward equity inclusion. And as I mentioned, we have a robust professional learning offerings in other areas as well. I'll just succinctly tell you our priorities, because we may circle back to that if time allows. Our emphasis right now is on facilities, improving facilities, worker shortage, and addressing mental health. And then everything that I would say the General Assembly's enacted in the last 5 to 7 years, which hasn't been resolved yet. So that's sort of the complement of our work. And finally, what I'll say is when I mentioned that we're an at-your-service organization, I try, through my experience, my commitment to public service, and my belief in a democratic system, to do for superintendents or to support the legislature in just the same way. So, like my colleagues, very close connection to the policymakers who are in the education committees in particular. But for this committee or for other committees with which we might work, if you say, bring your best thinking to our committee table, so that we can have the perspective of superintendents in our public policy deliberations. I worked with the 55 superintendents who are members of our association and try to do that. And, we know from experience that it might not always be what you want to hear, but I will bring to you how they think. And it's through that process that I think we get the good laws and regulations that we have in Vermont. So that's how I would like to introduce myself to you and the association, and let you know that I'm at your service.
Thank you. This is on a very light note, so take this with irony, even though I have a mask on.
Sure.
Do you all ever sit across the table from each other and disagree?
We do.
Okay.
Yeah.
I'm gonna let me know.
Yeah. Well, we try not to. I mean, I think it's not unlike the legislative process, right? I mean, you as individual members, irrespective of party, find places to meet and discuss and iron things out and work things out. And it's not exactly like that, but it's similar. I would say, and I mean this with all sincerity, ultimately, our compass point or North Star as it is doing what's best first for kids, second for Vermont as a whole. And I'd say those two are synonymous. And then we try to keep a really, really tight eye on what the fiscal implications are. And, just to be really forthright about it, when right now there's a huge legitimate push for universal school meals. And that is a piece of public policy that resonates with people, and it should, because nutrition and the the emphasis on local agriculture and the viability of the state, hugely important. Next week, we're going to all be asked to go in and talk about universal school meals in the Senate Education Committee. And that sometimes presents a dilemma because when I, from my vantage point, look at universal school meals, which is entirely laudable, I have to compare it to, do we have enough money for PCB mitigation? Do we have enough money to improve facilities? With worker shortages and the plethora of ideas that people have to deal with worker shortage, there's going to be plenty of places to put money. You've got a huge looming question around early care and education. So when you take a finite resource, which I am persuaded we have to contend with in Vermont, and balance how you turn into the kinds of public interest priorities that you weigh, and you've got questions about whether or not you're going to raise new revenue or not, that's a really rich and dynamic environment. If you take those kinds of issues and put them among the three of us and our organizations, Sue, Jay, and myself, we don't always agree. And, sometimes any one of us, I think, could be sitting in a committee chair and represent testimony or make statements, and the other ones might, each of us might say, gee whiz, I wish that they hadn't said that, or that's the approach. But that's what this process is. And so a long-winded way, yes, but oftentimes we try to work things out because we feel that if we get commonality of interest, we're going to be better off in terms of advancing that interest. So.
Representative, and we'll just have a few minutes of kind of a round robin, I'm just sort of keeping it open.
Sure.
I'm refraining from, after Jay commented on my age, I was going to ask him a more difficult question, but I'm going to just let it go to Representative Krasnow.
So things kind of got all blended. So moving back, I don't exactly know the title of these people, but the regional liaisons or what is that what they're called? Who was the Chittenden County?
Chittenden County is well represented.
Or if you can just provide me with the names off.
I'd be happy to.
Okay, thank you.
I can do it really quickly right now. So Amy Miner's from Colchester, and she is the president-elect for the association. And that region, the Champlain Valley region, stretches from, it just so happens that it stretches from Middlebury all the way to the Canadian border. So I think there's 19 districts.
Right, but so, okay. So when you were talking about regional representatives from each, so who's the one for, I'm in South.
Mike Clark is our trustee. He's in Grand Isle County.
So there's no one from Chittenden?
Amy Miner is in Colchester. She's from Chittenden County. She's a president-elect. So if I showed you a map, if you took the state of Vermont and divided it into 5 segments, we've got one trustee from each of those 5 segments. And the Champlain Valley region is pretty much the entire border of the at least northern 2/3 of Lake Champlain.
Right.
So it stretches.
Oh, I know where. Champlain Valley. Just curious. Okay, so Colchester.
Yeah.
Is in Chittenden.
Yes.
District.
Yep.
Representative Burris?
I'm sorry to be so greedy with questions.
Sure.
I have 2 quick questions. One is, when you say that mental health is one of your priorities, do you mean mental health for students or staff?
I think both. I mean, what, and that's that's a big topic, but students first, because the school systems have an obligation to support kids in the educational process. And there's been a heavy reliance historically on the designated mental health agencies. But as a result of the pandemic, a lot of the relationships between schools and the designated mental health agencies has been upset, right? So when we talk about this in other committees, we'll talk about people, for example, who might, and you were talking about people who were leaving education to go work in other places. We're seeing some number of folks that were traditionally working in the mental health organizations going to work in schools, right? So that's part of the dynamic. But the topic of the mental health of staff in schools has also been an outcome. It's an interest, overall time, but it's a particular interest right now because the sort of experience that the pandemic brought to people in terms of upsetting their norms. And I'm not an expert in this area, but there is a heavy interest in terms of what's happening in terms of dysregulated behavior and how that manifests itself in schools and what the effects are on school employees. So that is a topic that you could fill hours of testimony with because people are paying attention to it. And it hasn't really been figured out yet in terms of what the public policy solutions to it will be.
My other question was, do you mind if the Education Equity Alliance, you said is concerned with equity, transparency, and accountability.
Right.
What does accountability look like for the Education Equity Alliance?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I'll offer my opinion. It's one of those things that we haven't discussed, but accountability really for utilization of public dollars and making sure that that there's a relatively level table with regard to how public dollars get used, and that the utilization of the dollars are accountable in every entity that's using them.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, any further questions for any of the Bs? Emily, did you have a follow-up?
No.
All right, I think we'll stop there.
Thank you.
As an introductory session, this was pretty useful. Thank you so much, Sue and Jeff and Jay, for spending time with us this afternoon.
Appreciate the opportunity to come by. Thank you.
Safe home, Jay.
Yeah, thanks. See you soon. Bye.